My name is Mike Browne, pronouns he, him, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager for Hilltop Educator Institute, the professional development and community outreach arm of Hilltop Children's Center, a Reggio-inspired preschool on the traditional lands of the Duwamish tribe, the first people of what is now known by colonizers as Seattle, Washington. As a professional development institute focused on anti-racism, equity, and social justice, we have to constantly examine ourselves, our programs, and actively eliminate barriers to learning so we can all benefit from the knowledge and rich experiences of others. Over the course of the years, we've listened, we've reflected, and now we're responding to the calls of our friends in Tennessee, Indiana, DC, New Mexico, Canada, and more to make our offerings more accessible. So, welcome to our newest segment called Community Voices. Now, despite being short in minutes, these segments pack a powerful punch. They're rich in knowledge from leaders within the field, and best of all, they're free. So grab a pen, share with a friend, and as Hilltop Core Values says, let's learn in relationship with each other.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Browne. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the Senior Community Engagement Manager for Hilltop Children's Center and Educator Institute, a Reggio-inspired preschool after-school program and equity-focused professional development institute. Today, I'm broadcasting, from my office. It looks like a dungeon, kind of, but ignore that. And my office is situated on the cultural, spiritual, and celebratory lands and meeting place for the Duwamish tribe, the first people of what is now referred to as Seattle, Washington. It's been a couple of weeks since I've been able to sit here and do one of these Community Voices episodes, but I'm honored and glad to be here with such amazing and inspirational people doing the work, doing the great work in the community. And that's Dana, Jennifer, and Doris. And I'll let these fabulous change makers introduce themselves, and I'm going to kick it over to Jennifer.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Molina, and I'm with the City of Seattle Office of Labor Standards. I'm an engagement specialist, and I oversee the Domestic Workers Ordinance. So I'm going to pass it on to Doris.
Hi, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Mike, and nice to see you, Dana, too. Everybody, my name is Doris Garcia. I am an organizer for domestic workers. I work in Washington and Fairwork Center, and I'm so glad to be here to be sharing amazing information around our industry and the needs of our people. So thank you for having us here, Mike, and I'll pass it to Dana.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here with all of you this morning. My name is Dana Barnett. My pronouns are she, her, and they. And I work with I'm a Seattle organizer for Hand in Hand, the Domestic Employers Network. And what we do is we support and organize employers of nannies, house cleaners, gardeners, home attendants in supporting the rights of domestic workers and having ethical and just working environments.
Perfect. So, just given the background of what's happening these last few days in Atlanta, in Boulder, Colorado, and in so many other places that aren't really getting the chance to uplift their voices or to be able to tell their stories, with so much violence, racism, sexism, and social injustices happening in the world today, I thought it was super important to reach out and chat with part of the economy, part of our society in which most people overlook. As sons of immigrants, I really wanted to uplift this sector that really holds a near and dear part of my soul, of my upbringing. So in order to start this workshop, in order to really ground us in some common terminology to work with, I'm going to invite Jennifer to kick us off with a small presentation. Jennifer?
Thank you, Mike. So I am going to share my screen. Uh, okay, so that is amazing. Okay, so once again, thank you, Mike, for bringing us together, and allowing us to use the space to discuss the rights of domestic workers, specifically in Seattle. Um, just like me, I'm just like you, actually. I'm also, the daughter of immigrants. I was born in Mexico, and to me, like my mom was a domestic worker herself, and I was growing up. So I'm also very passionate about this ordinance and making sure that, hiring entities and workers have this information. So with that said, once again, my name is Jennifer Molina, and I'm an engagement specialist at the City of Seattle Office of Labor Standards. Um, so once again, thank you, Mike, for bringing us together and allowing us to use the space to discuss the rights of domestic workers. Once again, my name is Jennifer Molina, and I'm an engagement specialist at the City of Seattle Office of Labor Standards. Due to timing, I'm only going to give a brief overview of the ordinance, and really hope that, by the end of this, you have our contact information so you can connect with us to learn more. Just, have the conversation and learn more. This ordinance is very personal to me because my mother immigrated from Mexico to the U.S., knowing very little English, and she worked as a domestic worker, to provide for me, right? And she had some great employers and some not so great, and that is the experience that a lot of domestic workers have right now, right? So it is important for households to understand that their home is someone else's place of work, and they have responsibilities under this ordinance. And before I go into the ordinance, obviously it's important to mention that this presentation is for informational purposes only, and it's not for the purpose of providing legal advice, or creating an agency decision, with the Office of Labor Standards and the viewer. Again, big thing, if you need legal advice, please consult an attorney. I have to say that, get it out there. So not a lot of people know this, but as of now, there's a total of 10 states that have passed domestic workers' bills of rights, with Virginia being the 10th state to pass that. The City of Seattle was the first municipality to pass protections to domestic workers, followed by the City of Philadelphia. And briefly, just to share some information about, and briefly, just to share some information about the highlights of, that's what I like to call them, of labor standards in Seattle. The City of Seattle passed its first labor standard in 2011. At that time, Seattle was only the fourth jurisdiction in the country to require all employers to provide sick leave benefits. The Paid Sick and Safe Time Ordinance took effect in 2012. The ordinance actually was being overseen by the Office for Civil Rights, because they were at that time responsible for overseeing all the ordinances. But since between 2011 and 2015, the city passed a total of 4 ordinances. It made it so in 2014, Seattle City Council passed a legislation, creating the Seattle Office of Labor Standards to implement these labor laws. The mission of our office is grounded in workplace equity, and at OLS, we definitely, we do that with our heart. OLS is mandated to implement all cities' labor standards, as well as other ordinances that the city may enact in the future. It's really crazy because, just to think that just not that long ago, there were only 4 ordinances. As of 2021, the City of Seattle and the Office of Labor Standards oversees a total of 16 ordinances. So that is really amazing, and we're making progress in this space. OLS offers a range of services to help employers comply with labor standards. Our services are free and private. They include trainings, resources, and labor standards investigations. And we also provide interpretation and translation services for those who request them. The Seattle Domestic Workers Ordinance came from community organizing, just like all of our other labor standards. This ordinance gives basic workplace protection to domestic workers, and it is important that households know that they're required to follow this ordinance, right? The ordinance also requires establishing a domestic workers standards board that will make recommendations for future policy changes. According to the Seattle Domestic Workers Alliance, there are approximately 33,000 domestic workers in the Seattle area. That's a lot. 33,000 domestic workers in the Seattle area who will benefit from this, from this amazing ordinance, right? So again, it's important for households to learn about this, because there are 33,000, just in Seattle. And obviously, I just want to point out that if you can see Doris in this both that really just she truly been advocating for the ordinance since day one. This ordinance applies to individuals, households, and companies who directly hire or employ domestic workers in the Seattle area. If you live in Seattle and you have work done in or around a home, a private home, by a nanny, cook, home care worker, house cleaner, household manager, or a gardener, your home is someone else's place of work, and you are considered a hiring entity. As a hiring entity, you must provide domestic workers with payment of Seattle's minimum wage, uninterrupted meal and rest breaks, or extra pay. They don't get a break. 1 day off after working 6 consecutive days, and this is for workers who leave or sleep where they're employed, and the right to retain their personal documents and effects, and of course, a workplace free from retaliation. This ordinance covers both employees and independent contractors. It applies to all the types of domestic workers that were just mentioned, regardless of whether they are hourly or salary employees, independent contractors, full-time, part-time, and or temporary workers. It's also important to highlight that a worker's immigration status does not impact the coverage or removes its protections. As a matter of policy, the City of Seattle does not ask about the immigration status of anyone using city services. A hiring entity is a person or other entity that pays a wage or pays for the service of a domestic worker. This is households, individuals, partnerships, association, businesses. This law applies to all entities, and that is also really important to know. And again, we can meet one-on-one to go into the details of this. It's important to highlight as well that the ordinance does not cover individuals who work on a casual basis, individuals in a family relationship with the hiring entity, or home care workers paid through public funds. Really briefly, casual basis refers to work that is, one, irregular, uncertain, or incidental in nature of, the duration, right? Or two, different in nature from the type of pay work in which the worker was initially engaged. Whether a worker is working on a casual basis depends on, circumstances. So that's also really important to understand a little more, and we can talk about that, they're not one-on-one training, if, hopefully somebody reaches out. Family relationship refers to the child, spouse, parent, grandchild, grandparent, or sibling of either the hiring entity or the hiring entity's spouse or any domestic workers whose close association with the hiring entity is substantially similar in nature to a family relationship. And last but not least, a worker who is paid through public funds, is excluded, from coverage. So technically, this applies to local, state, and federal governments, including but not limited to Medicare, Medicaid, the Older Americans Act, the Veterans Administration. So workers who are paid through those funds, they are excluded from this ordinance. A hiring entity is responsible if it employs a domestic worker, or if they contract with somebody else for the service of a domestic worker. There's only one exception, if the individual or household contracts with another hiring entity that has an employment relationship with the domestic worker. That contractor is solely liable unless the individual or household interferes with the rights established by the ordinance. It's important to know whether a domestic worker is correctly classified as an employee or independent contractor for two main reasons. Obviously, this will help you understand your legal responsibilities, and because a domestic worker who is considered an employee as opposed to an independent contractor may be entitled to additional worker protections, such as basic and safe time. A household that contracts with a separate hiring entity should always ask the company whether the workers are treated as employees or independent contractors to understand, whether whether the household is responsible for compliance with the law. And even if the separate hiring entity employs their workers, the households must not interfere with the workers' rights established by the ordinance. In any event that the households, do so, they will be liable. They will be liable for actually violating the ordinance. When two households employ one worker jointly, both households are liable for the rights of the domestic worker. This joint and several liability will likely exist, even if a violation happens at one home and not the other. think of it this way: by employing one worker, both households share the obligations and share the responsibilities in the event that one family fails to uphold the ordinance. The ordinance requires that Seattle households and other hiring entities ensure that their domestic workers receive a minimum wage. Every year, Seattle's minimum wage increases, on January 1st. The minimum wage for this year is $16.69 an hour. And because most hiring entities are small employers, they must pay the minimum wage rate assigned to small employers under the minimum wage ordinance. And if the worker receives, tips, or the employer provides medical benefits, then they can pay the 15-hour wage. Again, we can go into this in further detail. Is a hiring entity is able to make deductions from a paycheck that go below minimum wage. That's important to say, but only when the worker is explicitly authorizing it and making sure that the deduction is in writing in advance, and obviously for a lawful purpose and for the benefit of the worker. Under the ordinance, domestic workers have the right to receive a 30-minute meal period for every 5 hours work and a 10-minute rest break for every 4 hours work. Rest breaks are always paid, and meal periods may be unpaid depending on the circumstances. A domestic worker who resides or sleeps at a place of employment cannot be required to work more than 6 consecutive days for the same hiring entity without an unpaid 24-hour period of consecutive rest. Any amount of work that is done in 24-hour and a 24-hour period qualifies as a day of work. And a 24-hour period of consecutive rest means that the worker is completely relieved from work duties, not required to remain at the hiring entity's home, and not required to return to work if called. A domestic worker may waive a day of rest, but again, only if the worker is aware of that they're doing that and does it voluntarily. Hiring entities are prohibited. They're prohibited from keeping any domestic worker's original documents or other personal effects, like a passport, work permit, visa, or money. If it's theirs, don't keep it. The domestic workers ordinance also prohibits hiring entities from retaliating against domestic workers who, might exercise their rights under this law. Hiring entities may not take an adverse action like threatening to terminate services or reporting the domestic worker to federal immigration authorities. As a result of the worker just trying to assert their rights. Again, the ordinance super prohibits that. The Office of Labor Standards, we have made available a model notice of rights in English, Spanish, and other languages. You can locate this in the Domestic Workers Ordinance section of our website. The model notice of rights includes an explanation of the domestic workers' rights provided by the ordinance, and a space for the hiring entity to state the established way for the provision of domestic services. Hiring entities are not required to provide a domestic worker with this model of rights, but that said, OLS strongly encourages hiring entities to provide a domestic worker with this information. Among other benefits, a record of providing a notice of rights may help demonstrate compliance with the ordinance if a hiring entity becomes the subject of an OLS investigation. And last but not least, due to timing, this is all I have, but I always like to go ahead and, tell people that at OLS, we look forward to, work closely with hiring entities, to make sure that, they understand the responsibilities, the domestic worker knows their rights. That's our first priority. So obviously, we know that it can be a little difficult to connect, with us directly. So we make it as accessible as possible. Give us a call on 206-256-5297. More information, you can see it here on the slide. We do, like I said, we do provide language access, and several of us in the office also speak different languages. So I have multiple screens on my end, so there we go. So thank you for allowing me to share this super brief information. I know that Doris and Dana can tell you that that's actually just a teaser of the ordinance, and it takes a lot more time to go into detail about the ordinance. Every household, has different questions. I mean, there's always different scenarios, and I always like to tell people that, when in doubt, please reach out to OLS directly, and we can, myself or someone in our outreach and education team can sit down and walk them through training to make sure they're in compliance. Or if they feel more comfortable, they can always reach out, to Dana from Hand in Hand, which she'll go more into that, or Doris at Fairwork Center. So thank you, Mike, and back to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for all of the information. On our Napcast, a podcast which is I'm shamelessly going to plug, which is co-hosted by two male early childhood educators of color, which includes myself. We recently had a conversation with Stacy Kono, the executive director of Hand in Hand, the Domestic Employers Network, and she really helped me realize, and all of us realize, that childcare is so much more than just the educators in a school, but it consists of our nannies in our homes, our cooks, our domestic workers, and so much more. So I really do appreciate you giving us that context and really helping to broaden our thoughts about who consists of essential workers, who consists of childcare workers, their rights, and really why we are all essential in this work together. So appreciations. Thank you. And I want to kick things off right there with just a conversation about the growth of childcare and caregiving over the years. And if you really think about it, caregiving is such an international resource. And due to unfortunate situations and circumstances at times, such as migration or diaspora, war-torn regions, et cetera, and we are seeing, especially within the United States in our context, an influx of new ways and possibilities of family and group care, ways that are central to cultural and historical ways of being for some communities, most notably communities of color, since that's what we represent. And essentially, since domestic workers are overwhelmingly femme-identifying voices of color. So I really want to highlight with this first question the amazing contributions that voices of color are having on this historical Eurocentric models and modes and ways of being. So what are domestic workers, first of all, and what are some ways that you have seen childcare, disability justice, policy, et cetera, grow to all of the gifts that communities of color, immigrants, refugees are giving this Western society? Who wants to take that first? All right, Doris.
Yeah, I would like to say, again, Mike, thank you for the space. And I would like to say first and foremost that domestic workers are essential workers. And I think this pandemic has really pointed out in a big way how much families and household need the support of someone that care for their child or their children, for their family members, right? Because domestic workers aren't just nannies, are also caregivers, and we know that in this pandemic, that was also a big community that was impacted by this, and beyond of being essential workers are very hard worker people, like people that really care about who they're working for. They invest their time, their love, they're even, they worry about their families, they worry about their kids, and this relationship, it's unlike any other in a work environment. This is why it has been, in my opinion, so difficult for people to understand that this kind of job is a real job, that this kind of work is a real work, because there is so many things that touches our industry, right? We're not going there to provide a service, but we're also being part of your family. We're there to take care of your kid when they're falling, when they need someone to hold their hand while you're at work. It was my experience to be part of a baby, giving her first steps, and then having that conversation with her mom and saying all of these things that they were learning and starting to do by themselves and with your support, right? Because at the end, it's very reflected and how a kid becomes kind and loving and respectful, and it has a lot to that we know that the formative years are so important for the personality of the kids, for their character, for who are they going to be. And these are the people that are coming to support families to do that, and later, like you mentioned, there is educators in this path that we have to reflect so much on. And I think this is a great opportunity for people to really start seeing, if they haven't already, to start seeing what the work of domestic workers is, right? It's beyond support. It's like, if you think about it, like, it's really, if we don't come to do our job, we don't come up to work, then you can't go to work, you can't do your things, you can't provide for your family. But it's not it's as much as I'm providing for you, you are providing for me as my employer. And there is, because of so many emotions and so many different things that happen and during this relationship, that it gets all foggy, and people can't take advantage of workers and more of our community, like immigrant community, people of color, women of color. Myself, I'm Mexican. I came to Seattle in 2011 as a part of an au pair program, and I had the fortune to be placed with an amazing family that treated me well and respected me in so many ways. But I also knew of so many others that weren't placed in the same situation than me. And since then, it has been in my mind how this really reflects on very much racism, right? Classism, and how I've seen, many people in the program being from Latin America, being women of color, being impacted by how they've seen and how their work is perceived. And I think I really appreciate you for having us here and having this conversation. And I can, keep going on and how much, we need from people like you and others to bring up these voices and the need of our community.
And staying with you as a kind of a follow-up question, and just talking about your experience as an au pair and as a domestic worker, can you just describe, what does respect look like for you? How did that come from? How was that tangibilized, if that's a word? Can you just give us some examples for that?
Of course. One simple one is be on time and let the person get off on time, because that is, and it's, such a basic example, but it's so, if you want to put it back to you, like, you wouldn't expect your employer to have you stay longer if you're not being paid for it, and that is one of the things that I try to make workers understand. We tend to be so giving, we tend to be, so loving, and that we give and give, right? And we very rarely expect to have something back. But there is come this time where, your nanny is there for you when you need her to be on time. And also, they expect to leave on time because they also have a family. Many of the domestic workers and many of the women of color, they're domestic workers, they have family waiting for them back home, right? And it's like that is respecting their time. That is giving them the opportunity to, plug off and say, I'm gone to my family because they need me, and at the end of the day, this is a job. And it's so easy for many employers to forget that. So, respect will look like that. Respect will look like, let the worker take some time to rest. Give them the opportunity to, if they are there. And more now at these days with in this pandemic, where employers are working from home and they get to share the same space with workers, they don't feel, they have the flexibility to even take a break to go to the bathroom sometimes. They don't feel like they can't look at their phones if their employer is there, even if the kid is resting, even if the children are, having some playtime or some alone time, or, whatever that looks for you and your family. Like, give them the flexibility to breathe and take a moment for themselves, right? Because as again, to me, one of the things that I keep telling domestic workers is just think about your employer. Do you think your employer will accept that condition? No. Do you think an employer is having that situation at their work? Probably not. Why should we accept this, not the same? Why should we just expect that we get, the little they can give you or can provide you, like if you're already providing minimum wage to your employer, good for you. But you can also, if you can give more, provide them from what, will make them feel safe and secure and want to come back to your home to work for you, to give all their love and all the, the attention that they provide for you. Because when you give more than you should, ourselves, as workers, we're gonna see that, and we're gonna give even more and love your family and care for you in a way that you wouldn't even believe sometimes.
Perfect. Beautiful. Beautiful. So a lot of things were coming up in my head, but I'm gonna circle back to additional questions. But
Mike,
yes.
can I add just something to this question?
Yeah.
Well, first, my head was like gonna fall off from nodding so much from Doris, so she covered so much of it. I just wanted to cover like another kind of aspect of your question about like what women of color and immigrant women have given to domestic work or childcare, how we see childcare. I also wanted to just point out that women of color and immigrant women have also given so much to our idea of like fighting for the rights of domestic workers, for telling us that domestic workers, that this is work and that domestic workers deserve to also have rights. The rights that Jennifer went through from the Seattle municipal law, these are very basic things that domestic workers have been long excluded from. But, Black women in this country who, after slavery, their main work that was available to them was domestic work, which was the same work a lot of them were doing as slaves. They have been standing up. They have been part of the backbone of like civil rights movements. They've been the backbone of women's rights movements, and they've been standing up, and even excluded from, in some cases, the workers' rights movements at large, right? And what unions think about as who is organizable. They have been saying and showing that domestic workers are organizable, they can organize, they've been the leaders in this fight. And as more and more immigrants have become part of this labor force, they've also been bringing that really strong worker rights, organizing strategies from where they come from. And in many cases, the rest of the world, the global south in particular, has been ahead of us on rights for domestic workers. The UN passed a domestic workers' bill of rights quite a long time ago, and this country is still just really like a baby when it comes to granting these rights. Although this is the moment where we're really pushing forward, I think, as a nation.
So as you were both speaking, the one word that really came up to mind was essential. So I kept thinking about how childcare is so essential and how childcare is so vastly underfunded, and how childcare for many only refers, there's a very narrow view or mindset around it, how it really only refers to educators or providers. Meaning when we think of childcare, we often don't think of domestic workers, which makes sense that domestic workers face even greater challenges, as you were alluding to, Dana, and especially around achieving that fair and equitable pay and just respect in general. And, childcare can't be considered an important field in general if domestic workers aren't also receiving that adequate support and respect. And I often compare it to how all lives can't matter unless Black lives matter. Just like we can't live in the land of the free if we still have our Latinx brothers, sisters, and Two-Spirits still locked up in cages. So can you state the case for people in my position, for lawmakers who are watching this, of why the fight for fair wages for domestic workers is actually the fight for the future of childcare, which is actually the fight for the future of work overall.
Yeah, I can begin it. Thank you so much for that question, for all of these questions. Yeah, as you said, and as Doris, I mean, I think she went into a lot of this in her response too, about how this is essential work, right? Childcare, raising children, caring for elders, caring for, you know, people in our homes, our basic needs. Like, obviously, these things are essential. They're essential to life. They're essential to the reproduction of our society, right? Like who we are and who we're going to be. This is this next generation. And yet, and so that seems like so simple, and yet it's completely not valued, right? And so, and there's a lot of different ways to look at why this is. But you know, one lens to look at it through is the lens of gender. Like this work of raising children, of taking care of care work, is thought of as like essential women or femme labor, right? It's like this idea that there's a mother in the home, there's someone who identifies as a mother, and that the mother has these maternal instincts. It's like part of, it's not essential work, it's essentialized work, right? It's like part of our essential nature as mothers is to care and to support and to love. So it's not work, right? It's just what we're kind of born to do, and it's taken for granted. And so it's not, and it's women, so it's not valued because we value productivity and we value right, we value profit. And even though this work is kind of the backbone of having that happen, like the tagline that the National Domestic Workers Alliance uses a lot is domestic work is the work that makes all other work possible, right? And so it both makes our whole world possible for people to be raising children and taking care of us and taking care of our homes, and it's also work in itself, right? It's work that requires expertise. It's work that requires experience. And yet it's invisibilized. And part of that is there's this idea that this should be the mother's work, and if it isn't, it's embarrassing, so a mother maybe shouldn't even talk about, wants to sort of pretend that the worker that they've hired doesn't exist because of their own guilt that they're going through. You know, there's so many different layers to it. And it's also just the way that our society and culture treat this work. And then to overlay that with the racialized nature of the work, as Doris was going into, as we've talked about a little bit, that this work was, you know, done by slaves post Jim Crow. It was the main work that African American women could do. And again, it was seen as like just essential to their nature, right? Like the mammy stereotype. It's like, yeah, this is what they just want to do it. They're so good at it. It just comes naturally. It doesn't take any sort of thought or experience or expertise or skills, which is, as we know, totally untrue, right? And so, and I think it, as you said, I think it directly, how we think of this idea of raising children, it absolutely impacts how we think of teachers, how we value or don't value teachers in education, right? Why that's underfunded. So there's definitely such a deep connection between this work that goes on in our homes and the work that goes on in schools. So, yeah.
Perfect. And would Jennifer or Doris have anything to add in onto that?
This one, no?
Okay, perfect. So I'm in an organization where part of the families that we serve are upper class, and a lot of those families employ domestic workers. So part of my work, just in general, as an anti-racist consultant, as a senior community engagement manager here at Hilltop, is to really support other organizations through avenues like this, conversations like this, as well as the work internally, right? Because you can't just do it to other people. You got to do the work yourself. And a lot of that work is around activating families and communities of privilege. We're talking white privilege. We're talking research privilege. We're talking male privilege. So my question is kind of twofold here. Is there anything we can do as organizations by implementing systems or new policies that can have that ripple effect and support domestic workers' rights? I'm going to stop there and see if anyone has an answer to that before I move on to the second part.
I can take it away before you go into the second part because I know Doris and Dana can really dive into that. So as you said, right, like a lot of the households, are, you know, rich hiring entities, that's kind of how they're considered, right, financially wealthy, even though there are other households in different, demographics as well, right? But that is the majority. And one of the things is really important for households to understand that their home is someone else's place of work. That is the first thing that organizations and advocates can actually help us get the word out there. A lot we still that is to this day, like it's been almost 2 years since the ordinance passed, and to this day we still struggle to make to get households to see themselves as a hiring entity, to see themselves as an employer. And when they begin to do that, right, when they understand and when they're okay with the fact that they're an employer, right, they will automatically start changing, hopefully, their mentality, and by then knowing that as an employer they have obligations, right? So obviously, at the city of Seattle, we want to work with those households to make sure that they understand the responsibilities under the ordinance, which is why conversations like these ones are extremely important. As for domestic workers, they can initiate a civil action to address violations of this ordinance. And it's important to mention that the statute of limitations is 3 years. But we also understand how difficult it can be for a domestic worker to submit a complaint because of the relationship with the household is so personal, it's so intimate, right? It's not like they work in a place with 10 other people and they can submit a complaint and the employer won't know who it was. It's a very different case. So we always encourage domestic workers to reach out to us, again, to OLS, and our number is 206-256-5297. Definitely, reach out to us, and, we can walk them through their rights and make sure that they're being heard. And also, if they feel more comfortable to, right, reach out to Doris and Dana or a lot of our community partners to make sure that, they have access to support.
Thank you. Dana?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So Hand in Hand is an organization that's made up mainly of employers of domestic workers and also allies of domestic workers. There's also some domestic workers within the organization, but it's mostly, we came about as a way about 10 years ago in New York to support the New York Domestic Worker Bill of Rights. And at that time, there was an organization that was Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, that's members who were mostly employers organized to support the National Domestic Workers of the New York Domestic Workers Alliance to support this Bill of Rights, and saw just the importance and like the essentialness of having employers in this particular kind of industry be hand in hand organizing alongside workers, and recognize the way that we are, we're I can't think of that word, interdependent. So, it's also about care, dignity and care. It's about disability justice. It's about all of us being able to receive dignified care and be care workers in a way that has dignity. So, so when you're talking about just leveraging privilege, absolutely, like that is that for me, joining Hand in Hand, I joined as a member before I became a staff person, and for me it was just such a clear way to leverage my own privilege in a way that's about solidarity, right? It's about what impacts me in my home, and I think as a white person, oftentimes I'm looking for ways to use my privilege in positive ways in order to support justice and support most impacted communities. And I think a lot of folks who try to be anti-racist white people are looking for that. And I think this is such a clear example. Sometimes that can be a little bit of a large, question of like, how do you do that? And not to say that all employers are white. It's also about class privilege, and it's also just about solidarity. But I'm saying that in this case, it was really clear for me of like, I have a nanny. Sometimes I've hired house cleaners. So this is a way that it's really practical, a way that I can see like myself having a clear role in this work. And so I think as an organization, absolutely sharing information about the ordinance, about hand in hand, like we can provide brochures that you can have at your workplace, sharing the information with parents. And also, I think something else is just recognizing and acknowledging who is supporting families in their home. Like I said before, this work is really invisibilized, and sometimes, we don't talk about that labor. So just acknowledging maybe even lessons and lesson plans, like not just saying who's in your household as far as like your, guardians or whoever, but also like who are the workers in your home? Like just acknowledging that is true, and making it visible for children, making it visible for families, or giving families a way to like share. Not that I'm not saying all families don't recognize this work, but giving a way to like just share it and normalize, that this is part of like how our world works and runs.
And I would like to add something to that. I mean, I totally agree with what Jennifer and Dana say, and definitely give space, provide spaces for workers to be able to reach out or to be able to come find resources from you. I've seen many domestic workers, going to the same place before pandemic. We will gather at the same places, we will do similar things, and that is an opportunity where you can find people to provide these resources, to provide information, and not just the workers. You as an employer, you can do that within your network. And like Dana said, like let's just start sharing the information. If we see someone that is not providing the rights for their workers, it's up to us to help them to do the right thing, right? Let's say that they don't know, they don't have the information. Let's help them, let's do what it could just not help them, but also their workers, and lift up this industry that needs this the most. There is many needs in our industry. Many of our workers are isolated. Many of these people don't have the language to speak up. They don't have, the confidence to talk to their employers. And this power dynamic really affects them specifically, right? It's going to be way easier for an employer to give the rights and provide the rights for their workers than it will be for workers to ask and assert those rights. So it really starts from that. It starts from employers providing those rights and giving even more than that, right? Because at the end, it's going to help our society. It's going to help, our communities. And why wouldn't we want our community to thrive? So it's very important that if we have the opportunity, share these resources, share the information, and help someone do the right thing.
So for me, that's coming up. So a lot of the times I feel like, or sometimes the lines get blurred in this work as an employer. I hear employers who have live-ins say, well, I give them access to my car, so they should be okay if they work 15 minutes later. Or they'll say things like, well, they get to use my energy, or whatever justification like they have. So they should show up to the birthday party on Saturday and be there for free. So I imagine live-ins, nannies, cooks might feel a little bit of pressure in this and have to kind of weigh this balance of such things. What advice would you give them to help find their voice, to advocate and draw that line? And that's for anyone.
Mike, that's a wonderful question. And I can also provide bigger examples than that, unfortunately, I've heard from domestic workers, they're like, well, my employers are so nice. They give me a gift card for my birthday for $50. And then I'm like, but you just told me they don't pay you overtime. No, but they're really nice. And, but this family, it let me buy my coffee from their car, once a week. Yes, but you don't get sick time, right? Like there's things like that we as employees, as domestic workers, are so easily to forgiven to give away or have taken away from us, because we will want to rather have a good relationship with our employers, because for us that is many times more important that the economic aspects or the economic gains that we get out of this relationship, even though it is an employment, is a relationship, employer employee or an independent contractor. And this is one of the things that I struggle the most when communicating to domestic workers, because we tend to always for the lack of a better word, romanticize our relationships with our employers. We think that we're going to be there with them forever, and we rather wait until they fire us for us to say, oh, I have a better offer, I have a better opportunity, I'm going to have to leave you. I've seen that many times, and it's so hard to communicate to them that they have to look after their needs, what's best for them. And it's so hard, like I say, when you don't speak the same language, when you struggle with the culture, there's all these differences that are hard sometimes for workers to grapple with. It's what I say is, try to have an honest conversation with them. I always, I'm always open to coach them and tell them what are the things that they can talk about, how can they approach this conversation. There is and sometimes they're being successful at those conversations, but other times they just don't have the courage to do so. So it really, I think in my almost 3 years in my organization, working closely with domestic workers, specifically with nannies, I've seen so many of them grow, so many of them really taking that, owning that power within themselves, that confidence, and being able to, okay, then this next time I have to find a new a new job, I'm gonna speak up, and I'm gonna have a contract, and I'm gonna put everything in writing, and I'm gonna make sure that we are both in the same page, right? And I wish I could give you a more specific answer to tell you like a map or a plan, and these are the steps that they can take. It really goes or has a lot to do with the specific situation, with the relationship they're in with the employer, with how long this relationship has been. At some point I was working closely with a worker, trying to coach her to have a better agreement and a higher wage. And it wasn't that long ago. She was making $17 an hour, watching 2 kids and cleaning the house, and working over 40 hours and not being paid overtime, all of these things. But she was, so thankful for having a job, for having this family continue working with them for this long, for being part of the family. And, I was like, look at all these nannies. And this was an immigrant woman of color, right? And you have those discrepancies where women of color are here and white women working in this industry are over here. Well, there's nannies making $20-$30 an hour for 1 kid or 2 kids. There is these women doing this much work for so little. And I so much was trying to help her. And one day she comes to me, Doris, guess what? I got a raise. I'm like, yes, I'm so excited for you. How was it? Well, I talked to her. I told her what you told me. I'm like, that's amazing. How much they gave you? 50 cents. And I was like, I took it. I'm like, well, yay. But, I just you could have, and these people, obviously, my and always my feelings are towards these employers, where when they can give more and care for their workers, and they're just not wanting to do it, and it's not up to the employee. It's at the end, like I told you, it's about this power dynamic where the employer has more power, more things to give and say than sometimes employees can. So I will say, just take if you know anyone that needs support on finding a better agreement, send them my way. I will coach them. I will give them my best advice, and I'll be there, along the way to support them.
And I'm
Can I add to that a little from the employer perspective too? Yeah, I think you brought it up a few times about just like absolutely workers, need to be empowered, and Doris and the Nanny Collective, and there's other organizations like Casa Latina that work directly with workers and can provide that kind of space and community to build that empowerment and sense of empowerment. There's also a lot that employers can do. And I know even for employers, something that can be really tricky is that it's awkward. There are awkward conversations. And for a lot of us, we're not like a boss who's taken boss classes or classes in business management. We don't have an HR department in our home. So we might not even really think of ourselves as being employers, or feel really insecure, honestly, in like our role as an employer. And so Hand in Hand is also really here to support, and there's other, organizations that support with things like contracts. I think if an employer can, and I think we all also, like, a lot of us really value relationships and want to have a good relationship. And I've also seen something happen during COVID where, we were encouraging employers to sign a petition, to sign a agreement that they would continue to pay even if they weren't bringing people into their homes, if it was, during lockdown or whatever. And, I've heard from employers who say, well, I tried to continue to pay the person who cleans my home, but they wouldn't accept it. There's just so much pressure on employees, on domestic workers, to act as if this is a labor of love. They love you. They love your family. It's so personal, interpersonal, that there's not a lot of trust that people will really continue to hire you if you assert your rights, and if you kind of show them that I'm not actually your family member, I am a worker in your home. What was that great movie that came out a couple of years ago? Oh, Roma. It really shows like that dynamic of the mom thinking, oh, you're one of us in the family, and yet you're in this separate corridor. You have to turn off the lights at night. Like, it's not an equal relationship. And so things that you can do as an employer, you can have a contract, you can work on communication, just laying some things out to make sure it's really clear. You can have regular scheduled check-ins, and you can also let workers know about what their rights are. So those are all different things you can do to really try to make it clear and set up that environment from the beginning that I respect you. This is your work environment. And so, even though there's a lot of things that are about relationship, it's also a formal environment too. And so you can feel comfortable coming to me, and even setting aside time to check in, that's paid, where someone can share with you if there's something that's not going well, or they need more money, or whatever it might be, so the employer can also really help create that dynamic, or encourage that dynamic.
I'm so fortunate to get like both perspectives on it. I'm loving this conversation. So thank you so much. And I'm gonna throw it back to, I'm gonna put Doris on the spot right now. Lucky you. I promise I'm not picking on you, but I know I'll be sending this interview out to a lot of my contacts who are live-ins, as well as families in the community who might employ domestic workers from Spanish-speaking countries. So that's the key word, Spanish. And I'm hoping you can answer this in Spanish since you have a relationship. But, ¿qué consejo les darías para ayudarles a encontrar su voz? ¿Tienes algún consejo en general?
Gracias por preguntarlo, y gracias por preguntarlo en español. Me da mucho gusto poder usar mi lengua natal en este espacio. Y el consejo que yo les puedo dar, como te lo comentaba anteriormente, es difícil encontrar esa voz, pero lo que yo he notado en mis años de experiencia trabajando muy de cerca con esta industria es que lo más importante es que aprendamos nuestros derechos, ¿verdad? Porque si no sabemos las cosas que están ahí para apoyarnos, no vamos a empezar a sentirnos seguros con nosotros mismos para poder hablarlos. Entonces, por eso a mí siempre me gusta empezar cuando yo entablo una relación con una trabajadora o un trabajador, enseñándole sus derechos. Después, explicándoles que hay una diferencia en la industria dentro de cuáles son los derechos y cuáles son los estándares de la industria. Hay mucha gente que ya provee stipends para seguro médico. Hay mucha gente que ya provee otros beneficios. Entonces es importante que sepamos cuáles son esas diferencias y que por cuáles nosotros podemos seguir aplicando o pidiendo a nuestros empleadores. Es muy importante que nos sintamos cómodas teniendo una comunicación abierta con los empleadores. Como dijo Dana, a veces es difícil, a veces es raro tener esas pláticas en la sala, en el comedor de los empleadores, y a veces hasta nosotras mismas pensamos que es algo malo, ¿no? Y nos ponemos nerviosas de entablar esa comunicación. Pero creo que dando el espacio a que eso suceda nos va a ayudar a poder entender entre empleador y empleado o contratista esa relación mejor, ¿no? Dar espacio a esa comunicación, ser honestos con los empleadores. Una de las cosas que yo aprendí cuando por primera vez vine a este país como au pair era una técnica que le llamaban de sándwich. Cuando tienes esta relación, que estás creando esta dinámica de plática, siempre es bueno empezar con una cosa buena de la relación, entrar en medio el asunto, no necesariamente un problema, ¿no? Pero la cuestión a tratar, y al final con algo bueno. Y de esa manera, cuando nos comunicamos con nuestros empleadores, estamos asegurando que venimos con las mejores intenciones, que solo queremos despejar ciertas dudas y que queremos que ellos nos escuchen. Entonces, cuando nosotros también tenemos esa disposición de escuchar sus necesidades, ellos van a escuchar de sus necesidades. Pero en realidad, yo de corazón les digo a todas las trabajadoras que sepamos nuestros derechos, porque yo de primera mano he vivido las diferentes caras de la moneda, donde yo he llegado a una entrevista de trabajo aceptando lo que me ofrecen y solo callada, o ok, yo puedo hacer esto, sí, yo acepto esto. Y he tenido la oportunidad de yo hablar y decir cuáles son mis límites, cuáles son mis necesidades. Y cuando yo he hecho eso, he notado que las familias lo toman mucho en consideración y nos consideran profesionales y que nos gusta mucho lo que hacemos porque lo reflejamos de la manera en lo que hablamos. Entonces, esos serían básicamente mis consejos, y cualquier cosa les insisto que se acerquen a nosotros, a Nanny Collective, Work in Washington, Fairwork Center, Hand in Hand, OLS, Oficina de Normas Laborales, así como Casa Latina y otras organizaciones comunitarias que estamos aquí para todas ustedes.
Perfecto. So my colleague just walked in and he was like, I heard a little bit of that. And he was like, yes, I agree. So perfect. Thank you so much. My mind is wrapping around bias a lot, right? This industry, the childcare industry, caregiving industry in general is so riddled with so much institutional bias. So what does that look like with domestic workers, and how does that play out when it comes specifically to nannies and live-ins, or even the cleaners we employ in our classrooms?
It's so hard. It's so hard. I can tell you from firsthand experience that when I first came as an au pair, I remember having my host mom asking me, a few months in living in the city, she will ask me, have you faced racism? Have you, encountered these situations? And I was like, not really. I have it. I feel like people are nice here, but little did I know, it was in a way my an awareness on how these biases tend to look like, and how people really overlook you or belittle you in many ways when you're doing this kind of work. Because many people can think that the people doing this work are uneducated. Many people were like think that this is just what you get to do through a situation or other in life. But many domestic workers are long time caregivers devoted to this work, to this industry, and they've chosen to be in this industry. And when it comes to domestic workers, they're immigrants, they're women of color, many times you start in that path, and that path as a coincidence is starting to caring for your own family members, starting caring for someone's friend, and then you realize that is what you want to continue doing. And we keep giving ourselves to these families, and so many times these families don't very much consider their own biases, and how you can make so awkward and weird comments toward ourselves or our culture or our identities, that can be so harsh and harmful. But in a way, ourselves, at least in my experience, you wanna believe they're coming with the best intentions and are not trying to be hurtful. And I think I saw this played out many times when I met different au pairs from Latin America. Just recently, a year ago, last year, when we were trying to pass a state bill. They protected domestic workers and also included au pairs. There was so much pushback from families that they thought that the work that au pairs were doing wasn't domestic work, and it wasn't they shouldn't get to have protections, which I disagree. If someone is spending 45 hours a week watching after your family, after their well-being, and that is a domestic worker. They're providing a service for you. They're providing this care for your family. Why wouldn't you consider this person as a domestic worker and let get this rights? And I think the people that faces the worst part of this story tend to be definitely Latinx immigrants. They're coming to this country, and they're coming with this many illusions and dreams about learning about a culture, and then you get here and realize, because of your living situation and the amount of work that you have to do, you have so little time left to really learn from the culture or do things on your own or for your own, to just really come and learn from the culture. And I think that it really has a lot to do with the color of our skin sometimes, or our accents. People, it's so it can be really sad to see this situation playing when many of these employers are decide to bring sometimes people from Europe, then rather than having a Latin person because of their color of the skin, or because maybe a person from my mom still owns a phone. Sorry. And I remember saying at this listening, or this people bringing their comments into legislation or in Olympia, saying that they have people coming from Italy and how much they love them. And if you think about it, these are the people that face less racism, less biases because of their color of the skin. They have so much more privileges than people from Latinx countries like myself. And I can tell that was definitely a very like privileged point of view from these families of saying, well, they come here just to have fun and we give them everything and we provide, they have Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus and they have our car and they have this. Yes, but you're still paying them $4 an hour for a work that deserves more than that. You're still paying, you're not giving this person their appropriate breaks. You're not providing this person with sick time. If we come to watch, to care for just, most beloved little beings in your life, why wouldn't you want to give these people watching for them and caring for them the respect that they deserve?
I have something to add to that. So it's really interesting to mention that, there's a lot of programs, right, that, can help you bring somebody to work in your home. But there's also households that go and find workers on their own. My mom was actually, that's how she came to this country. Like my mom was a practicing nurse in Mexico, and a family went down to Mazatlan, where we're from, and they posted an ad saying this. They were looking for a nurse, and this was like back in the 80s, 90s, whatever, So they posted an ad in the newspaper. Obviously my mom was qualified. Fast forward, she moved to Seattle, and that was a big thing, right? When she found out, when she moved to Seattle, she found out that she wasn't here to be a nurse. She was actually here to care, to clean the house, to be a nanny, to do all the work that just care for the home, right? And the worst part is that they actually went as far as like keeping her passport, her visa, right? So that's in a lot of domestic workers who are brought, by families from other countries. They are in those positions. It's not really difficult position to be in, because then you're not only are you, you're lying to them essentially, right? When you're bringing them, with the belief that they're going to be, doing something that they love, and it's being switched to something that not only is not what they were hired to do, but also, like, Doris said, they're getting paid $4 an hour for, doing all that work. So it's really, I think it's really, that's why it's really important for all households, whether you go through a program, whether you do it yourself or go through a family member, it's really important that before they make a decision to bring someone into their home, they make the time to have a conversation, within their household to see like, hey, what are the dynamics going to be and what do we expect from this person? What are the expectations, right, for that we're going to set from the beginning, and what are our responsibilities? And if you don't know your responsibilities, then take a moment to do your research, and then that way you're starting that relationship from the beginning in a healthy way that both the domestic worker and the household will benefit from that.
And it's, if I may, Jennifer, this your mom experience so much reminds me of just the current experience that I have from a worker. A very similar situation. This worker had her own daycare back in the peninsula of Yucatan, and she was found by an employer through LinkedIn or some work site similar like that, and she was promised this much money, and she was you're gonna live with us, we're gonna feed you, you're gonna have all of these things, and you're gonna make this much. Turns out when she arrives and she starts after she's here a few months in with this family, she realizes that she's being paid $4 an hour, and she's not being granted sick time, and she's not being granted breaks, and she also, due to the pandemic, can enjoy of her normal activities. She has to be at home, she has to be like not necessarily quarantined the whole time, but like caring and taking care of herself, not just because she was worried about it, but also because she knew she has this responsibility with this family. When these employers can and could have provided more than what they were offering to her. And for her, it was so crazy to understand how little they were, at the end, providing for her. And she was there with the best intentions. She traveled from all the way from Mexico to Seattle to Washington State, and to find out herself in a situation that wasn't even beneficial for her in comparison of what the industry's standards were, right? Like, but the way that this and this employer pretty much tricked her into traveling to Washington was like, you're making dollars. You're going to be making dollars. You're not going to be paying bills. You're not going to be paying rent, or you're not going to be, you're going to win all this, and yeah, if you convert those dollars into pesos, wow, you say, wow, even myself, when I first again came as an au pair, I thought like, whoa, $200 a week, whoa, and then you are there and you're like, $200 a week, what? It just totally changes once you're living there, once you understand, so many things that come into place when you are living in a city like Seattle. So it like Jennifer said, please do your research, try to find out what's the rate, what are the benefits that you can aspire to get, the things that you can ask for, and speak your mind, and if you're not sure, look it up and find us, and we can totally help these people to find out what they like, a better contract, a better work placement even.
So keeping on the topic of bias, discrimination, and all my favorite isms, can you help shine a light on how you have seen young children internalize bias against those who have various visible or invisible abilities? And also, what about us as adults? How have we exhibit bias against those with various psychological, physical, or emotional abilities?
Yeah, it's a big question. So I think, ableism is so deeply entrenched in our culture and society, and in white supremacist culture, which is the culture that is our dominant culture. The idea of individualism and perfectionism, and again, valuing people over, valuing what people bring as far as profitability. And so all of this is so deep that it's like the air we breathe. And so it's taught to children so early in life. I think that some things I was thinking about of just ways that we can really counter that, or things I've seen as like good examples of that, are, rather than of creating spaces that are inclusive from the beginning. So rather than having there be kind of a standard that we hold as like what's supposed to be normal, so therefore good, and then making accommodations for people who might fall outside of that standard, we can make more accessible classrooms from the beginning. We can make more accessible spaces in our homes for youth in the beginning, recognizing that, many of us, almost all of us, don't really live up to whatever that image is of like the able person anyway, and that like an accessible space benefits everybody. You see that in like accessible playgrounds that are built to think about how everyone, every kind of body can participate in play. And those playgrounds are super fun for everybody, right? There's like places like the Seattle Children's, I'm spacing on the name, but it's right down the street from us. The Children's Garden. It's a space that really centers accessibility, and it's open. It's for people with all different varying types of ability and types of bodies, types of, selves to come, but it's accessible to everyone. Or to most people, that's, and it's such a fun space. We go there all the time on weekends to get scared of the goose. I get scared of the goose. Anyway, sorry. But so, and I'm really seeing that now so much with COVID, that there's different ways that things are both more accessible, more inaccessible. when everything's online, right? But for like my very close friends who have a son who, was in Seattle public schools and now he's at home, and they said like this year is the first year that he's ever really been able to fully participate in the classroom. And that's because it's been online, and that's made it more accessible for him with his disability. So it's just really, and I think there's so much that we've learned about accessibility, also about language accessibility during this pandemic, that I hope that we can really carry over if things begin to shift to being in person again. So that, yeah, we can think about what are ways that everyone can really participate. And I think that teaches us lessons about who belongs here. And yeah.
So I remember at the beginning of this conversation, Jennifer, you mentioned, especially in your presentation, that there was a Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. And this Domestic Workers Bill of Rights was created to ensure domestic workers have their respect, their dignity, and the recognition they deserve. As someone who works in schools and community organization, are there mechanisms or provisions that we can support or enforce to protect caregivers as nannies, such as nannies or live-ins?
So definitely collaboration opportunities, like, with community organizations like yourself are really important, right? Like hosting conversations like this one, can help us get information out, so more, more households, start to see themselves as a hiring entity, right? We have to make sure that they're aware of the responsibilities, and, and to be actually to be able to, be in a position for them to not, not violate, right, any someone's rights, because maybe sometimes they just don't know. A lot of it is just creating awareness. So I always tell people the first thing is, did you know? Did you know that there is an ordinance that protects, the workers who work in your home? Did you know that, if you hire someone in Seattle, if you have, actually in general, but if you hire someone in Seattle, you are a hiring entity. Your home is someone else's place of work. So again, collaborations like this ones, for me, again, like, in kind of going back to the virtual, like life that we have, right? Creating a spaces like this one. I mean, I'm not, I had to give a presentation, right? But I know that most people, they're not big fan of presentations. They want to go ahead and sit down, especially now if I'm standing in front of a computer. They want to go ahead and kind of just glance through something and then hear from people, hear from their experiences. Like, Doris herself, brings, so much experience to this space, and that's what not only the domestic workers, can see, right, but also the households, can also see from someone like her, can hear from, hand in hand. So again, getting this word out. As far as pairs, right? It is my understanding that the city has not concluded its review as to whether or how pairs might be covered under the ordinance. And I know Doris and Dana can say a lot more on this.
Just one thing is that just mentioning this Bill of Rights, that we really try to talk about it as a hand in hand, and I think beyond, as a floor, not a ceiling, right? These are so basic. Of course, these are things that we need to do, and sometimes they are tricky to figure out. How do you give a rest break when someone's taking care of, someone who needs constant care? Things like that. They're definitely tricky to figure out. And so, utilize Jennifer and other means for support for that. But they are pretty basic. And so we really just want to encourage people to think of it as a floor, and to really think about, like, what is a living wage in Seattle? Like, what do people really need? And how can we go beyond that? We're looking also at kind of next steps of benefits for workers. How can we really make sure that this very vulnerable population who's working gets all the access to the same kind of benefits that others have access to?
So back to you, Jennifer. What happens if you are representing a school or a community-based organization and you suspect some illegal or some fishy activity is going on with a domestic worker. Is there a list of organizations or policy from the city of Seattle that you can recite or give us?
So the first thing always, is to, if that's actually the case, reach out to us, directly. I'll provide my information again at the end of the presentation or at the end of the conversation, excuse me. So reach out to us. That's what we're there for, right? Whether you're a household, or someone who works at a school, especially because when you work at a school, you get to see, right, like more things when it comes to students as well, and the families themselves, right? So definitely reaching out to us. The Office for Civil Rights is also there as well, to help, with discrimination, and again, I know that, navigating government can be so difficult sometimes, especially if you don't speak the language. Just it can be overwhelming, right? So definitely connecting with us, and if you feel more comfortable, I would say that reaching out to our community partners. We have amazing community partners, that speak different languages. They're in different areas, and obviously, Fairwork Center and Hand in Hand are like two of our strong partners when it comes to this ordinance, and we have a network of people that we can either. I always tell people that come to me, and if I don't know the answer, I will find someone that knows the answer for you, right? If I'm not able to help you, with this situation, I will find someone who can help you with the situation as well. So again, it's just that. To me, like the biggest thing is just reaching out. And I guess Doris said this a while back, right? We have to speak up, and if you're not speaking up, then no one else is really going to know what's going on around you, right? If you are not learning about an ordinance or things that you have your obligations, right? Then you will not be in compliance, and that's it's something as little as you just didn't know, right? So again, just reaching out to us, that can be a big thing, or connecting with our partners.
So I really hope nobody has to watch this in 10 years. But because by that time we would have cleaned our act up as a country and eradicate racism and sexism and classism. But in the off chance that it doesn't happen, say I am a city from such and such state and I'm watching this in 2031. And I'm just getting this started in the process of building my own domestic bill of rights for my community. My question to you all is, what have you learned from this process of either passing the ordinance, from this conversation, from the work that you're doing right now in the community, that you would like them to consider, or just wisdom you'd like to pass off to them? And I would just open that up to anyone who wants to answer.
So I'll just go briefly. One of the things that I actually, my position was funded, through the ordinance, right? So that's actually how I came to the city, because there was the need for someone to really just focus on this ordinance, right? But one of the things that I noticed when I came on board was that, a lot of workers were not coming to the rulemaking process meetings. They're not attending, board meetings, that are open to the public, right? So if the first thing I always tell people is immerse yourself in those conversations. Find the people, find who are the movers and shakers, who made something happen, and reach out to them. I know Doris, she's been there from day one, so definitely connecting with the people who have done the work and are continuing to do the work as well, right? There's cases where there's only some people are only involved in a certain part of the process, right? But then there's those people who are there from the beginning, are continuing to advocate for this. So it's always do your research. That's the biggest thing, right? Do your research, and make sure that the voices of those who are supposed to be, we're supposed to be helping, they're being heard. Like, obviously think of, how the requirements and obligations might affect your household, but also think of, how the person who's working for you is being affected. How can I make sure that this worker is being provided with more than just the basic protections? How can we make sure that this person feels like a human being, right? It's as simple as that. How can we make sure that we're treating people the way we're supposed to, regardless of their, color, ethnic background, all these isms, right? So that's the biggest thing. And I do hope that we're not, in 2031 or something, and we're still having conversations that, where we're advocating for these things to happen. So hopefully that's not the case.
I adding on to what Jennifer said, is probably along the same lines. Is just make sure you get these people involved from the beginning throughout the end. It's so hard for workers to come to the center of the table when they depend on the income that they're making out of their main job. So if it's there an opportunity for organizations like us, like the city, from people in the community to advocate for support for workers to be part of this conversation and make them able to be in those tables, let's do that. Like one of the things that we're struggling a lot with recently in the standards board and the participation from workers is that they don't have this spare time to do so. There is so many other things that they have to figure it out in order for them to have an extra amount of time to be able to approach this process. It can be really hard for them on top of their 40, 45 hour, 50 hour work week, for them to spare 2 hours here and there to be able to provide their own expertise in this matter, and I think that's a challenge that we're facing now, that we are trying and with the support of the city to be able to provide some support, some economical support, some accessibility options and resources for them to be able to join, because we know there is so many other challenges that go into this matter, and why while we can and we want these workers to be part of these conversations, we should be, providing them with resources and support to be able to do that same thing. We can't just expect them to be part of this hard work, for the sake of it, and without considering their many, many other struggles, being the head of a household, being, providing care for their own family members. At the end of a week like that, there's no more time and energy for them to be part of this. So, but if we start from thinking, in 10 years, if you were to ask me, what are the things that we can do to have more voices reflected in these policies, like get these workers involved from the beginning. If you have to provide a stipend for them, a payment for their great input and expertise, let's do that, and consider them as, why can we hire consultants on like policy making, right? To have some, amazing draft on a legislation, and yet just rely on workers to give their spare time, right? I think that is some kind of switch that we can do, start considering them as real experts, because they are that.
Yeah. I'll just add just something that's really come up for me, and I feel like I'm still learning through this process, is just, you learn about maybe in school how a bill becomes a law, and then that seems like the end. But actually, like so this bill is in place, but what it actually takes for workers to have these rights takes all of us, takes a whole community. And so I totally agree with what Doris was saying, that the more you get people involved in the beginning and think about how are you going to continue to create space for workers to be part of this process and for their voices to be heard, I think the better, because it's all about like creating the infrastructure to support implementation, and to support that happening. So like these rights don't mean anything unless everyone knows about them. And this is a hard industry to find everyone, right? Because it's not like there's one place you can go and all the domestic workers and domestic employers are there. So it's just things, a lot of grassroots groundwork needed to be done in the beginning to get as many people involved, and then thinking about what are you going to do after it, because it won't just, even if you have champions in city council or in the mayor's office, that you still need at the whole communities to be able to move this forward and make these rights a reality.
So much of our conversation today has focused on ways that we can empower childcare businesses and supporting domestic workers' rights. And we obviously didn't hit on all the many complexities and opportunities for support. So I would love to just end today by just going around and just hearing what else is on your top of your mind that we didn't get to discuss today.
I just wanted to say there was something that came up for me a couple of times of just like about bias and children, and just that, if you're an employer, if you're a parent, like your children, you probably know this, but I'm just going to say it anyway, they learn from watching you. You're the model. So how you talk about workers in your home, how you treat them, like all of that is going to have such a big impact on, on our children and on how the biases that they have.
Yes, there's so much to say and not enough time. So my plug will be to obviously reach out to us directly at the Office of Labor Standards. Reach out to me. I'm always more than happy to work around the time actually that works for households, because I understand that business hours they're not always ideal because they're working. So if they want to have a conversation around what their obligations are, right? Reach out to me. I'm more than happy to do it at 6 p.m., 7 p.m., like when the kids went to sleep or something, right? Because that's the flexibility that, we're trying to provide households with, right? We understand that, there's these obligations that you have and, we expect for you to follow them. However, we know that learning has to happen, right? We need to provide you with education for it. So, contact me again, our office number is 206-256-5297, or even better, you can reach me directly on 206-678-7821. That's like my work cell phone, super available. Just give us a call, and definitely, please, schedule time to have this conversation.
And I will want to share something very personal, but it's kind of, Dana made me think of like how you learn and how law is written and then passed. To me, this law meant so much because I just not only, help provide a voice for these workers, but I learned about the process, and I learned, I'm just a regular person. I'm just an immigrant that came to this country and learned by doing these things. I'm not a politician. I've never studied any related with politics, policy at all. Whatever I learned, whatever I know, I've learned through this path, and I want to encourage workers to be part of this path. It's from people like them, people like me, from people like you guys here, that we made this happen. We make this a policy, a reality. Back in the 50s and 60s, these laws were created, right, from the input of workers, from the needs and workers, from the stories from workers. And it's exactly what we need to make these kind of laws a reality. We need people to come forward. We need their stories. We need we need them to speak up. And I insist, like, I am a regular person trying to do something better for something to improve our industry. And I want really workers to feel like they can be part of that, and they can drive these policies. They can drive these politicians do this hard work, because what they want is to hear from workers, and my doggy agrees. What they want is to hear from workers. What they want is to support their constituents, and that's the workers in our community. So I really want to encourage all of our domestic workers out there to be part of this important work. We need them. We need you. We need them. All of you, we need you to share our resources, to share this information, and to be a face of this work, because it's the real people out there that makes this happen. I came to learn how a law was drafted. It was listening sessions from council member, listening to the needs. I learned how to draft a bill with collaboration from community partner organizations, working really tirelessly on the definitions of from domestic worker to what do we mean with minimum wage, and this I learned in my path here. I didn't go to school for this, and like I did, many other people can get involved and start learning from this and find your path, because now I know that this is my path and I want to continue fighting for these workers and many other workers in our city and our state.
This has been such a rich and just insightful conversation, and my coffee cup is empty, but my cup of feelings is just overflowing right now, just knowing that there are so many great people out there like all of you who are doing this work, uplifting the voices of the marginalized, leading with the racial equity lens, and really working to restore and ensure that dignity and humanity is for all. It's for all workers. So thank you for all that you do. And thank you to all who is listening right now, who are learning, who's leaning into that vulnerability, who's coming to this presentation, to this interview with the open heart and open mind, because we can't achieve respect and liberation alone. It's going to take all of us to do our part in achieving and creating these physical, emotional, psychological safe environments for all. So I implore you to get involved, and of course, feel free to reach out to any of us. So until next time, everyone, take care of yourselves and take care of one another. Thank you.